Hi, this is Remembering the Past, the show where we talk about people who died recently who've had a profound effect on our history, our society, or our culture. A lot of ground to cover tonight. We're going to start out with Jimmy Ellis, who died recently at the age of 74. And for 2 years, Jimmy Ellis was the heavyweight champion of the world from 1968 to 1970. He came out of Louisville and he became the champion of the world in the WBA, the World Boxing Association, when a fellow Louisvillian, Muhammad Ali, was stripped of the title. Jimmy Ellis won a round robin to determine who would be the WBA champion. He defended his crown successfully against Floyd Patterson, and he lost his crown in 1970 to Joe Frazier. He did get to fight Muhammad Ali once a little later in the 70s, but he lost when he injured his hand. He was a good fighter, but he was always up against a little better fighters. Here is WDRB in Louisville to talk about Jimmy Ellis.
Ellis started boxing at age 15 after watching his best friend lose an amateur bout to a kid who grew up to be Muhammad Ali. Soon Ellis was jabbing as dynamically as Ali, who became his friend and sparring partner. When Ali was stripped of the title in 1967, Ellis was the final fighter invited to an 8-man tournament to pick the new heavyweight champion.
He told everyone that Jimmy would win it, and Ali told everyone that Jimmy would win it, and all the boxing gurus, all the people with all the knowledge, they laughed. They thought it was a joke, but Jimmy prevailed.
Ellis won the tournament, beating Leotis Martin, Oscar Bonavena, and finally Jerry Quarry in Oakland on April 27, 1968.
All I can say, I was as proud as a peacock. Big brother, heavyweight champion, yes.
Jerry Ellis is his younger brother and was with Ellis throughout his boxing career.
Winner, new heavyweight champion, last
Many fans refused to recognize Ellis as the champion. They loved Ali. Ellis refused to get upset. He went to Sweden and defended his title against Floyd Patterson.
Ellis says after winning the title, his brother never ducked or dodged any opponent in the ring.
He fought Joe Frazier twice. He fought Ali. He fought Oscar Bonavena. He fought Ernie Shavers. He fought a number of great fighters, yes.
Ellis and the man known as the greatest, Muhammad Ali, were not only close friends and shared a hometown, but they also shared something else that might surprise you.
Angelo Dundee was trainers for both, but he was Jimmy's manager as well. So when they fought, Angelo's allegiance was to Jimmy because he was manager and trainer.
Jimmy Ellis later lost the title to Joe Frazier in 1970. He fought 5 more years and then retired to Louisville after an eye injury ended his career, which included 40 victories in 53 bouts, often against fighters who outweighed him by 25 pounds.
We're going to move on now to George Heilmeier, who died recently at the age of 77. And George Heilmeier was a brilliant electrical engineer. Most of the obituaries concentrated on his major invention, which was the LCD technology, which he invented when he was working for RCA. And that's the technology that you're familiar with that's used today in watches and flat-screen televisions and computers. But I think he had an even greater importance in the United States because in the early 70s he was named the head of research at DARPA. DARPA is the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, and by becoming the head, he was the #1 researcher in the Defense Department. And we've talked a little bit about DARPA before. They were in large part responsible for the internet. They were responsible for a lot of other technologies in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, and George Heilmeier was probably the #1 person involved in stealth technology. Here's a report from DARPA on George Heilmeier.
The mid-70s. The arms race was intensifying. Technology was changing warfare. Advances in Soviet radar, anti-aircraft, and missile technologies were challenging American air power. The director, Dr. George Heilmeier.
Vietnam was still with us, although tapering down to a certain extent. People were concerned about air warfare, particularly the surface-to-air missile threat. And at that time, the Soviet Union had a very, very large submarine force. And so anti-submarine warfare was another critical need of the Pentagon at the time.
Responding to those threats, Dr. Heilmeier took DARPA in a new direction, building experimental prototypes to test and prove the viability of new technologies. In 1975, he presented 6 major thrust areas to Defense Secretary James Schlesinger. One stood out: the invisible airplane. It was a radical idea. Experiment with aircraft performance for a very low radar profile.
You know, that early morning liftoff of the Have Blue aircraft, the first stealth aircraft, which was demonstrating the principles That was a very, very exciting morning because I thought to myself, this small group of guys, have made aviation history this morning.
In just 2 years, DARPA had produced an entirely new airplane, invisible to radar. Stealth technology was experimented on the ground and on ships.
When I was in San Diego in about 1979, I remember them testing AWACS planes. It was something really revolutionary. I think it's interesting that the obituaries didn't credit George Heilmeier more with his DARPA work. Truly a brilliant guy. Another brilliant guy who was revolutionary in his field was Gary Becker, who died recently at the age of 83. He was the University of Chicago economist who won the Nobel Prize in economics for his work in applied economics, how economics explains everyday behavior. Here from a Chicago Tribune editorial is a little bit about Gary Becker. Becker won the 1992 Nobel Prize in Economics for having extended the domain of economic theory to aspects of human behavior which had previously been dealt with, if at all, by other social science disciplines such as sociology, demography, and criminology. His insight was that in all these areas people make deliberate choices in order to achieve specific goals, much as they do in shopping for groceries or applying for jobs. That approach may seem less radical today thanks to the popularity of Freakonomics and other books that deploy economic theory in often surprising ways. But when Becker started out, he recalled later, economists were openly disdainful. Nobody liked what I did. That soon changed. So illuminating were his analyses that his former University of Chicago professor, Milton Freidman, called him the greatest social scientist who has lived and worked in the last half-century. The University of Chicago honored them both by creating the Becker-Friedman Institute for Research in Economics. Well, that's high praise working with Milton Freidman, and while all his colleagues didn't agree with Gary Becker, he was universally respected. Here he talks a little bit about what he learned from Milton Freidman.
What I learned from him, above all else, and I think the other students who went through Chicago would have similar reflections, that economics was something serious. This was not a game to be played by clever academics. This was valuable analysis that helped us understand many aspects of the real world. He had no interest in theory for its own sake, but for him, theory was an engine analysis, a phrase he liked to use that he said he got from Alfred Marshall, but he used it over and over again, an engine of analysis to understand real-world problems. This intimate relation between theory and the real world was not common at that time. Sometimes it's not common even to this day, but had enormous influence on all of us who went to Chicago and ultimately on the profession. He practiced what he preached in his own writings. I consider his book, Theory of the Consumption Function, his most impressive, innovative, and complete contribution to the science of economics. It actually was stimulated in good part by an earlier paper by Rose and Dorothy Brady on consumption. And Milton built on that paper in a variety of different ways. The book assaulted an aspect of Keynesian economics on the relationship between consumption and income. But it was much more than that. It was an impressive, and at that time I would say unprecedented, combination of basic, simple economic theory, not very complicated, but insightful. Extensive analysis of a variety of data, not just one piece of data, but data from all aspects of consumption. And that combined with care in how he related the data to the theory. That threefold combination was a tour de force, a great book to this day, recognized as a great book. It went into Keynesian consumption-income relations, but a great deal of detail. Do blacks save more than whites? It was thought to be so, but he showed it was simply a misunderstanding of what income drove people's behavior. Do urban and rural people differ? Not really, he said. Do occupations differ? Reading that book was reading science, economic science, as his highest level.
Well, certainly Gary Becker took Friedman's work to a higher level, and he's one of the greats in the University of Chicago School of Economics. We're going to close tonight with Efrem Zimbalist Jr., who died recently at the age of 95. He was primarily a TV star. He starred on two great television shows in the 60s and 70s. But before we talk about that, we're going to talk a little bit about his family. His father was Efrem Zimbalist, who was one of the great violinists of the 20th century. He was Russian, came to the United States in 1911. He not only toured all over the United States as a violinist, but he also taught and composed. Then he went on to marry Alma Gluck, the great Romanian-born soprano, who around 1910 was probably the most famous singer in the United States. She was Efrem Zimbalist Jr.'s mother. Here are Alma Gluck and Efrem Zimbalist Sr. together performing early in the 20th century. Let's fast forward about 70 years to Efrem Zimbalist Jr.'s daughter, Stephanie Zimbalist, who was a star of Remington Steele with Pierce Brosnan. And here she is with Johnny Carson in the early 1980s discussing her family.
Everybody, I suppose, knows that your father is Efrem Zimbalist. Well,
or Efrem.
Or Efrem, as both close to him call him. You want you for the guest? No. I know he's a nice man and a very good actor, but you have a grandfather who's still active performing?
Yes, I do. My dear grandpa's 93, and he just wrote a series of miniatures and impressions for piano and string quartet that was performed.
Are you serious?
Yes, in Virginia City. Beautiful.
A violinist?
He's a violinist. He practices. He started playing when he was 5, but he still plays.
He must be very tired by now. Sorry about that one, too. That was really bad. Really bad. Talent obviously runs in the family.
Yes, it does. So we'll talk about Efrem Zimbalist Jr. He's sort of a screw-up in college, but he won a Purple Heart in World War II. He's known for 2 television series. Most people know him more famously for his television series in the late 1960s, early 1970s, approved by J. Edgar Hoover. He was FBI agent Lou Erskine in the FBI.
FBI, Milton, you're under arrest.
Call an ambulance.
What?
Right away.
Yes, sir.
Take Milton down to the office. I want to talk to him. After I talk to Milo. A couple of you go over this place, see if you can find any more guns.
Yeah, that had the earmarks of J. Edgar Hoover and Jack Webb. He was square then, but about a decade before that, he was hip. He was private detective Stu Bailey on 77 Sunset Strip.
77 Sunset Strip.
Starring Efrem Zimbalist Jr.
77 Sunset Strip.
Roger Smith.
77 Sunset Strip.
Edward Burns.
Here's the cool theme song.
77 Sunset Strip. 77 Sunset Strip. 77 Sunset Strip. A street that wears a fancy label. It's glorified in song and fable. The most exciting people pass you by, including a private eye.
Roger Smith, of course, was Anne Margaret's husband, and Ed Burns was kooky, and he didn't get a top billing originally, but banter like this with Efrem Zimbalist Jr. outside Dino's got him a billing and a detective office.
Hi, Dad. Man, I dig how you had yourself a rumble with that Dixon Square this AM.
There's not much you don't dig.
Way I dig it. You dribbled out of your place looking real bombed out, like traumatized. He'd had it, Dad. Do I always have to bring you on?
Well, he asked for it. Did you hear about it?
I'm hip. He'd tell how you came on sounding real harshly. All that jive about you cutting into bacon strips and noise like that.
That was this morning. This afternoon, I'm filled with love for my fellow man.
Shaboom. I was dribbling in when you cut out with some real mellow chick.
The mellowest.
Okay, Dad, you sound me. What's her name?
It's a funny thing, I don't know.
You putting me on, or is that for real?
No, it's for real, I think.
And another cool cat bit the dust.
There's your cheesy Warner Brothers ABC dialogue from 1960. You gotta love it. I'm going to close on that note. I want to thank my producer, Sid Taps. And we're going to salute Efrem Zimbalist Jr. with the other famous song that came out of 77 Sunset Strip in the early 60s. Ed Burns and another ABC Warner Brothers star of that era, Connie Stevens, with Kooky, Lend Me Your Comb.
Kooky, lend me your comb. Kooky.
Well now, let's take it from the top, grab some wheels, go well along and talk about some cuckoo deals.
But Kooky, lend me your comb. Kooky.
Now you're on my wavelength, and I'm reading you just fine.